Thank you.
Let's keep the conversation going with Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, the former deputy mayor of Jerusalem and the host of the Quad on Jewish News Syndicate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate your time. So we just heard that report from our Middle East correspondent Jody Cohen talking about the Bibas family holding out hope that the mother, Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir are still alive. The Israeli army admitting that there's been grave concern over their lives, but of course that they have not confirmed their deaths. Your reaction to this latest news, as well as what we're hearing from Hamas with respect to this family?
I think this is the news, as Jody said, that we've all been dreading. Hamas have said it, but the truth is that we already knew that the chances of them coming out alive were pretty slim, because last year, November 2023, when the first hostage deal was done, that was the hostage deal that brought out the mothers and all the children. And they were the only mother and children that weren't brought out. They are the youngest children, they're babies. Some of the children were still young, but they all came out. So the question then was, well, why didn't they come out when all of the mothers and children came out? Then again, at the beginning of this hostage deal, we've had the remaining women that were left, including civilian women and women who were soldiers. And the question again arose, why is Shiri Bibas and her babies not coming out with the first deal? And so we've been dreading this moment. You can always, and we must always, keep hope, and the families don't want to lose hope, and I understand that as a mother myself, but it's not looking good. And tomorrow, if we see the bodies of babies as well as their mothers coming home, I think that Israel is going to be in a really, really bad mental state.
Definitely, and angry, to say the least. Why? Yeah. Because the Bibas family, they became the faces yes. of the October 7th attack. The family rounded up by gunmen and taken into Gaza. The father was abducted also, but was released earlier this month. There are 6 other living hostages set to be let go on Saturday. Can you actually give us a background of those particular hostages as well as the remaining ones?
Well, the whole point of the first phase of the deal was to take out the remaining women and the men in what they called a humanitarian situation. In other words, sick, injured, not in a good physical state. There's an independent body in Israel when they were negotiating the deal that made the decision of who needed to come out in the first phase. And the only thing that they considered was who was likely to be in a worse state and needed to be gotten out earlier. And these were the men. And so we know that one of them is injured. We know that one of them is almost blind, and all sorts of other stories from other hostages who've come out and who've seen them. We don't really know much more than that, but these young men or younger men were selected as they call it, humanitarian crisis. But to be honest, at this point, they're all a humanitarian crisis because they've been almost a year and a half in dungeons. This is their own personal Holocaust, malnutrition and beaten. It's hard to think that anybody's going to come out in a condition less than what the category of humanitarian case are.
Fleur, talk about the second phase of the ceasefire deal, which calls for a permanent end to the fighting, a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and the release of potentially more hostages. Is this part of the deal as potentially solid as phase one? I mean, phase one definitely had breakdowns with respect to Hamas violating the deal.
Absolutely. They always violate the deals. They violated the deal in November 2023. They violated a deal on October 7th. We had a ceasefire with Hamas on October 6th of 2023. So this is what this genocidal terrorist group do. And that's why there's so little trust and faith. But there's a debate at the moment whether they should extend the first phase of the deal. In other words, don't continue to the second phase, but see how we can extend the first phase. In other words, provide more assistance to them in exchange for more hostages, release more terrorists from our jails in exchange for more hostages, or do they start a complete new negotiations for the second stage of the deal. And it is said that of the 70 odd hostages left, they know that there's about 28 who are living and the rest are dead bodies. So how do we get those almost 30 living hostages out? Hamas is demanding the complete withdrawal of Israel. Israel believes that it should stay in certain key areas so that terrorist activity is not renewed against our country. And this is really a very fierce internal debate that we're having. Do we save who we can as soon as we can, or do we insist on somehow keeping some type of military control? It's a very difficult debate. As a mother, I can tell you that it gets even harder to think that you wouldn't do anything you could to get your children out of that situation. And so that's where we're at. This is a Sophie's choice.
No, Fleur, this really upsets me, as does so many different things throughout the entire 502 days. You know, the thing is that when you look at the Israeli hostages, some are deceased, some are emaciated, some are in relatively okay condition. But when you look at the other side, the hostages that, or prisoners that Israel is releasing, they are healthy, well kept and maintained, and those are the killers, the barbarians.
Exactly.
So if anything, this hostage swap, if you will, actually sends a clear message to the world that Israel are the ones with the heart, if you will, treating their enemies with compassion.
Well, you would be right if the mainstream media were actually reporting the news. Unfortunately, the week after those 3 extremely emaciated hostages came out, that shocked everyone, and I think was a bit of a backlash for Hamas they didn't expect, the mainstream media, including CNN and the BBC, of course, spent that week doing damage limitation for Hamas by trying to say that the prisoners coming out of Israeli jails also looked emaciated, but of course they couldn't provide the pictures. They were saying, in some cases, seemingly emaciated. That's how farcical and cynical the reporting was. They were trying to report to an agenda that there was some type of equivalence between the prisoners and the hostages. Of course, one side are civilians and the other side are terrorists with blood on their hands. And they kept trying to make that equivalence. So you are right. Unfortunately, I wish the world would see it as clearly as you do.
Well, these false equivalences and narratives are also stoking violence, especially here in the United States. We're seeing anti-Israel protests. We saw one just last night in Brooklyn in an Orthodox community, which are calling for Intifada, which we know is the complete wiping out of Israel and blaming Israel for much of what Hamas did to Israel. So can you speak to this and how we can prevent more of these protests? Because it seems like they're not ending anytime soon.
They're not ending anytime soon, because you have to understand that Qatar and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to an extent Russia and a little bit China, have spent the last 30 odd years stoking this narrative that Israel is somehow the aggressor and these Palestinian terrorists are somehow the victims. This is it fits very well into the woke virus that spread around America and the Western world. And what people don't seem to understand is that we are in a civilizational clash with jihadi Islamism, which wants to not only get the Jews, but get everybody else who believes in free society, who believes in Judeo-Christian values and Western civilization. We're just the first stop on their tour of radicalizing the West. And they've understood that militarily they can't beat America. So how do you beat America? You try and make America deconstruct from within by making it hate itself and hate its Jews. And so far, in college campuses, it's working. And this is the extension of that. It's prevalent in the campuses, in academia, and in the mainstream media. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to indoctrinate the West against Jews, and Jews represent Western civilization.
That's the reason why we have to uphold patriotism and support our allies. Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.